Hello, I'm Chrissy Seaton. Welcome back to my channel. And we're continuing with the Book of Job series of video classes. And today we're going to look at chapter 40 and 41. So we're coming towards the end of the Book of Job. And in chapters 40 and 41, God rebukes Job, and then we also learn about the Behemoth and the Leviathan, and these are all very interesting parts. But we are drawing to a close of this series, and so we'll start today, and we'll look at chapter 40 now. As I said, this is where God rebukes Job. Now, as with all the videos, some of the verses I don't actually read directly. My concern is reading the explanations that I have in this book of Job, and also in the description below there is a link to where you can access the book of Job online, and it also will contain comments by Rashi. So if you don't have a Hebrew Bible, go right ahead and access it online. Comes up very well. The print and everything online is good size to read. So let's continue. Now in chapter 40, God still continues his prophecy to Job. But first he challenges Job to respond, if he can, to what he has said in the preceding two chapters, and in verses 4 to 5. Job acknowledges that he has no right to dispute Hashem's conduct of the world, and he will henceforth remain silent. He will say that his first question, that is, why the righteous suffer, has been answered. God's ways are good, and that he does it for our benefit, though we are unable to understand how or why sometimes. His second question, however, why the wicked prosper, has not been answered as yet. Now, Job will say merely that he is too overawed to challenge God and will never do so again, because he now understands that everything God does has a reason. Whether or not human intelligence can grasp it, in the continuation of his prophecy, God will touch on Job's dilemma over the success of the wicked, even though Elihu has already resolved it. And in chapter 42, Job will express total acquiescence, and that will be the last chapter in this series, the next video class. Now, verse 2 goes on and says, can one who contends with the Almighty be arrogant? And the explanation is that, is the Almighty a fellow man that Job can presume to challenge him as if he were God's equal? Alternately, it could mean, after having addressed Job in the previous, let me turn the page, in the previous two chapters, God asks him to respond, if he can, to say if and how he disagrees with God. Now, we're moving on now to verse 5. Job says that he spoke once, saying that God has ceded control of the world to nature and the constellations. Now he admits he was wrong. Job refers to his second question, why the wicked prosper. Now, according to Mezuzos, it is rendered as but about to, so meaning Job concedes that God rules the world, but he contends that both of his questions, why the righteous suffer and why the wicked prosper, have not been answered. Nevertheless, Job says, I will say no more. He will not continue to complain. Now, In verse 6, Hashem then responded to Job out of a whirlwind. That's how verse 6 begins. Now, after his first speech, Hashem asked Job to respond. That was in verse 2. Job said only that he had nothing to say, implying that although he would remain silent, he still thought he was right. Therefore, Hashem resumed his prophecy. The first prophecy came from the whirlwind, the operative word there. That was in chapter 38, verse 1, implying that its source was distinct and powerful. Now, since Job has become submissive and was no longer belligerent, God's response was from a whirlwind, operative word a whirlwind, implying that it was smaller. See these little layers and nuances that if you just read them without an explanation, you don't pick up all those little gems and all those little hints and things that get explained. So important. Now, in verse 7, in the whirlwind, implying that its source was distinct and powerful. I think I did read that. I did. Let's move on to verse 7. Forgive me, I do lose my place occasionally. Not satisfied that Job was silently submissive, God said that he would continue to speak and that Job should speak up and not be afraid. Now, moving in on verse 8, the explanation says, will you continue to deny God's justice so that you can refute your friend's insistence that you must have been a sinner? Now, in order to maintain your presence of being righteous, you challenge my system of justice. We're going to move down now to verse 10. Now, there's a brief explanation here regarding verses 10 to 14. Now, I want to read that. And it says, God challenges Job. You consider yourself totally righteous and wise and more capable than God to deal justly with the righteous and the sinners. Take it upon yourself to be the judge and impose your version of justice upon the wicked. If you can do so successfully, I will praise you, but you will not succeed. So, moving into verse 10 now, where it says, adorn yourself, if you will, with majesty and exaltedness. Now, the explanation as follows: to approach and understand my ways, raise yourself to the highest possible level of spirituality. Now, verses 11 to 13, the explanation, one explanation is given, and this is it. After adorning yourself with godly majesty, pour out your anger against haughty evildoers who oppress others. With the power of your spiritual greatness, humble and crush them, and thereby banish evil from the world. We're moving into verse 14, explanation. And the verse starts saying, then I too will praise you. Now the explanation states, if you are righteous as you claim, you should be able to accomplish all of the above. If you succeed, I, God, will praise you, and I would admit that you are more just than I. But you cannot accomplish it, so you are not as righteous as you claim. Now, we're going to move over now where we come upon the explanations and the discussions about the behemoth and the Leviathan. Now, let's have a look at an introductory explanation before we start there. Now, God continues to show Job that he is incapable of understanding the divine plan. Job cannot manipulate the destiny of fellow human beings who have a godly soul. If he is as righteous as he claims, Perhaps he can succeed with dumb animals. The chapter goes on to describe the giant behemoth, a land animal, and the Leviathan, an even more fearsome sea monster. Now, in a deeper sense, God is showing Job that everything has a role in the universe, and the many complexities involved in determining how they should interact and function is not for Job to dictate or understand. Consequently, how can Job presume to know all calculations by which God determines how to guide the infinite aspects of the world as well as the fortunes of the wicked? Now, verse 15, the explanation says, if I can create and control such a huge monster, this is referring to the behemoth, surely I can give reward to the deserving and withhold it from the undeserving. The explanation goes on to say, powerful though the behemoth is, it does not prey on other animals. It's a foliage eating. It eats grass. It actually says it eats grass like cattle. So, verse 16, and this is a continuation. Unlike carnivorous animals that display their strength in the claws and teeth that enable them to catch and devour animal prey, the grass-eating behemoth's strength remains hidden in its body. Verse 19 explanation. The behemoth was the first land animal to be created. Did you know that? I didn't know that until I read the book of Job properly. First land animal. And it goes on and says, so powerful is the behemoth that only God, its maker, will be able to slaughter him. Verse 20. The behemoth is so large that it needs a mountain of produce to feed it. But ordinary animals do not fear it because it is not carnivorous. Thankfully. Now we're going to move down to verse 24 explanation now. And verse 24 begins, God will subdue it with his eyes, perforate its nose with snares. So here's the explanation here. The translation follows Rashi. God will stare at the behemoth as it were, and the animal will be paralyzed with fear. God will trap it with snares of professional trappers. God can subdue it at will. Earlier, God had challenged Job that if he was as righteous as he claimed, and he was a match for God, he should be able to overcome the behemoth by the might of his will, but he could not. So, and others interpret this verse also as a continuation of verse 24, where it says, in the explanation, the thirsty behemoth plunges into the Jordan until its eyes. His body crouches in the riverbed, oblivious to underwater thorns that puncture his nose. Very interesting. So we're continuing over now. Verses 25 to 32 have an explanation, a collective explanation, which I'll read. The prophecy now turns to the mammoth sea monster, the Leviathan, and continues into the next chapter. Sarcastically, Rambam in brackets, God asked Job if he could devise any means to trap the Leviathan or to cajole it into serving him. Obviously not. So how can Job presume to put himself on a pedestal with God? Very good. Moving down, explanation for verse 29 now. God, could you housebreak him and make him a pet like a little bird, or put him on a leash for your daughters to play with? I just love that. Oh. Verse 30. explanation. The translation follows Malbim, and continuing the theme of the Leviathan's awesome power and invulnerability to human attempts to capture it, God asks sarcastically if people can collaborate to trap it and carve it up into food for themselves and the marketplace. I've always said Hashem has a sense of humour. It comes through at times. Alternately, can anyone cast a spell over the Leviathan to lure it from the water? So there's often alternative explanations. That's why I try to include them, because they just give you another, what I'm saying always, those layers. It gives you another layer. Now, we're coming into chapter 41 now, and a general overview. The chapter continues the description of the Leviathan. The reason the description is spread over 2 chapters is not clear. In chapter 40, Hashem depicts the Leviathan as a powerful creature that neither Job nor anyone else can subdue. This chapter continues and describes the most colossal and fierce sea monster imaginable. Now, many of these verses give you, the verse itself gives you a statement, a description, etc. And in some cases, I'll read the comment just to clarify things for you. But by reading through that, I mean, it's easy for one to gauge the correct message. This is not something we're going to mess with. This is God's domain. Now, in verse 1, an explanation says the very sight of the monster is enough to make a person faint. So how can anyone dream of combating it? I think it would be enough to cause more than fainting. Alternately, an explanation is, how can anyone think he can overpower the Leviathan and, as if it were an ordinary fish, place it before potential customers to be sliced up and sold? Now, in verse 2, an explanation is, if people are afraid of the Leviathan, which they should surely be afraid to challenge God, who created and controls the monster. Do you know, this springs a thought to my mind, just interrupting, but, you hear people say, well, I'm not going out there in the dark, I can't see. In Australia we say there might be a snake out there. I'm not walking out there might be a brown snake. I need a torch. I need someone to come with me. I need to be prepared. So we're afraid of these physical things. Mind you, one should be afraid of a brown snake. They're pretty nasty. Excuse me, Tilly. And, but however, it's a shame we don't have that same fear when it comes to offending Hashem or breaking his divine principles, etc., like that. Or how, we don't want to step on the snake at night or maybe go out in the dark and be attacked or robbed, but we should also have that same fear about offending God. I'm sorry, I apologise. I've got a new little puppy here that's challenging to my 2 mature-aged dogs. So, now, verse 3 explanation, having used the example of Leviathan to assert his own unrivaled power over everything, God diverges briefly from the description of the Leviathan to encourage those who undertake to serve him. Behave. Come here. I beg your pardon. It's way up. I'll get some peace and quiet. Where was I up to? Yes. verse 3, yes. I'll just reread it. This is explanation, having used the example of the Leviathan to assert his own unrivaled power over everything, God diverges briefly from the description of the Leviathan to encourage those who undertake to serve him. It goes on, whoever volunteers to observe my commandments, I have more than ample strength to reward him. Isn't that lovely? You sit still, Tilly. Just sit still. Must be good. We're nearly finished. Sorry for that little interruption. Oh, okay. I have more than ample strength to reward him appropriately because whatever is under all the heavens is mine. So I can confer whatever reward I wish. It goes on to say, Job, you should realize that if you had served me perfectly, you would have been rewarded generously. There you go. Homiletically, since my gifts to you enable you to fulfill my commandments, all of your earthly endeavours should be directed towards this purpose to use our achievements as a means to serve God. Very true. Now, alternatively, if you had bested me, you could demand whatever you want. To the victor belongs the spoils. But I am all-powerful, so you cannot make demands of me. Now, verse 4 goes on, and the explanation says, first of all, it's continuing from verse 3. God says that if anyone could claim to have overcome the Leviathan, or if someone's arguments could defeat God, he would be entitled to take pride in his accomplishment, and it would reward him generously. I have the ability to do so, for everything on earth is mine. Rashi renders, God tells Job that righteous people will be rewarded generously, not only them, but their offspring. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Come on. There we go. So, we're going on here now. Verse 6 says, the explanation, who can or would dare pry open the Leviathan's lips and face its terrifying teeth? Yes, take a brave person to try that. Now, in verse 7 to 9, the explanation is no weapon can penetrate between them. Verse 10, the waters of the sea part from his mighty sneeze until his blazing eyes are visible. Now, it goes on here. In verses 11 to 13, God describes the fiery breath issuing from the Leviathan's mouth and nostrils. In verse 14, it says, in contrast to other living creatures whose necks are vulnerable, the Leviathan's neck is powerful. And then we go over to verse 16. Verse 16 begins, as firm as the lower millstone. Now, an explanation here. In ancient times, the mills consisted of two stones. The lower one was affixed to the ground and immovable, and the upper stone rotated and crushed the wheat kernels. You can still see some of these in old historical museums and villages, etc. The implications may not be only a description of the physical firmness of the Leviathan's heart. It may also be a metaphor for the Leviathan's fierceness and refers back to verse 14, its heart is impervious to fear. Very good. Now, verse 17, when the Leviathan emerges and becomes visible, all creatures, whether fish or land animal, become frightened. Oh, imagine they would, wouldn't they? It says, when he moves, he breaks the pattern of the waves. According to Rambam, his very moving causes powerful waves like a tsunami. Verse 22, His hide is so tough that he reclines on the shards and rocks of the seabed without feeling any discomfort. Verse 23, the Leviathan's heat and activity make the sea bubble like a boiling pot. Verse 24, the verse itself says, in his wake a path shines. Now, as he swims, the explanation, as he swims, his huge bulk displaces so much water that it seems as if an empty path with higher water on both sides. And, you know, you do see that at the wake of a big ocean liner and things like that. You see that. So, as the Leviathan glides through the water, the frothing water in its wake looks white, like the hair of an old man, like the wake behind an ocean liner. We're nearly finished. Just be good. Just be good. Nearly finished. Now, oh, she's beautiful. She's only 11 weeks old. She's a little purebred miniature foxy. Okay, verse 26 is the last verse today. He looks down on everything elevated. Now, since the Leviathan resides in the sea, look down is not meant literally. Rather, because of his immense size and strength, he is not impressed with the dimensions of any other creature, no matter how lofty and haughty it may seem. God's speech to Job is now complete. The message is that God's infinite strength, wisdom, and providence over every earthly event and creature is beyond human comprehension. Therefore, Job can neither understand it nor presume to challenge it. So, here ends the video class for today. And I'm terribly sorry that Tilly has interrupted, but she's one of God's creatures, so we can't let a video class overlook her. Yes, I know, stop fighting. You're being a little bit naughty now, getting a bit cheeky. So, thank you all for watching, and thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. I have over 500 subscribers now, which is astounding for me. I didn't ever imagine that would ever happen. I come from the premise that even if my videos only affect one person's life for the better, then my work is done. I'm happy. I'm happy. So thank you to all those wonderful people who have subscribed. And our last video in the series will be chapter 42, Saving the Best till Last. And that will complete 18 separate videos in the series, the Book of Job. So I have enjoyed so much doing them, and I hope you've gained some benefit and understanding from them. And again, I apologise for our little interruption today, but she is rather gorgeous. So Tilly and I will say, take care, bye-bye, and God bless till next time.